the stalking continued. It continued to escalate, and I was fearing my safety more and more. Others, very close friends, for example, had also noticed, and they also feared for my safety, so I was forced to withdraw. I first came to UST when I was 17 years old and very, very excited. I remember I had been homeschooled my whole life. I didn't even know how classrooms worked. I didn't even know office hours existed. I was like, whoa, there's this time when you can just sit down with a professor and ask all the questions you want. I've never been able to do that before. Instead, I would just Google questions, but I can actually ask a real human being. So I remember I was first introduced to the concept of office hours during my first week of school. I thought I was the dumbest student in the university because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't have my textbooks. I had applied to the university last minute because I didn't get accepted to the Ivy Leagues I applied to because I had no idea how to even apply to a college as a homeschooler. And I remember being terrified. I was like, wow, the professor is probably going to yell at me. He's probably going to say, what are you doing here? It's only the first week. You should know what the material means. But as soon as I entered the office, I was like, wow, I can actually do this. I can actually reach out for help and ask questions and learn, which was my dream. The first professor I attended office hours with was Dr. Barloon. Dr. Barloon is an English professor at the university. I had originally applied to his course thinking, oh, I just need to apply for English 1, like everyone else. I forgot that I had actually earned a lot of credits previously at a junior college, and I did not need to attend English 1. But again, I had no idea what I was doing, so I attended the first week of class before finding out last minute that I was in the wrong course. But before I found out, I thought, wow, I need to start going to office hours early because I'm so lost. I need to figure out how I can be the best student I can possibly be. So I first started attending office hours with Professor Barloon the first week. And as soon as I walked into the office, he made me feel super welcome. He lent me his book, The Odyssey, because it turns out I had the wrong translation, which I had gotten online from a free source because I couldn't afford to pay for the book myself for a printed copy. And even after I withdrew or dropped the course because I realized I didn't need to take it, I was more advanced, he told me, well, you should keep coming anyway. I can lend you my books, we can talk about the books afterwards, I can even give you some of my tea. So every month at least, usually every week or every couple of weeks, I would go, I would borrow one of his books, and I would meet with him afterwards to talk about the books. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I'm getting one-on-one education with someone who has a doctorate. What more could I ask for? Thinking that the relationship was strictly professional, not wanting anything more than a strictly professional relationship to help me flourish in my studies. I began receiving emails explaining that we couldn't meet anymore to talk about books because a personal matter had come up. I was very confused at first, but I thought, oh, well, I guess something in his personal life just came up and should be fine. I'll let him have his space and his time. But I still thought it was suspicious how it happened so suddenly, and I didn't understand. And I was very confused why I couldn't continue with this supplementary education I was receiving. A few months later, during spring semester, I remember I was applying for a student leadership position. I was in the basement of Malloy, and I saw Dr. Barloon sitting next to the staircase. It looked like he was waiting for me, and I didn't understand why. He looked up, even though I knew that he was watching me as I passed through the hall. And he acted as if he hadn't seen me before, and he was like, "Oh, hello." And he told me I should come to his office again. So I thought, oh, well, I guess whatever happened has passed. I guess I can stop by and borrow another book. So I did. I went to his office to borrow a book, and he told me, to show you that I've been thinking of you all through the break, he handed me a really expensive chocolate bar and pressured me to eat it in front of him. He had done this regularly whenever I would come to his office, and I thought he did this with every student, just trying to be kind. But at that moment, I realized that something was really off. It felt strange how I was pressured to eat it right in front of him. And when I saw the book he lent me, it was Ethan Frome. I didn't know what it was about, so I took it, and as I took it, he said, "I think there are some things in this book that you can relate to a lot." I didn't understand what that meant, but classes were busy, already picking up, so I didn't touch it for a while. But shortly after I had met with him that day, he sent me an email saying, "I had a thought or two, but I thought that I would play a little word game with you so that you can find out what it is." How the word game worked was that he would write out different sentences, and he would blank out 2 words, and I would try to guess what they were. When I asked for the real answers after giving my guesses, he told me answers were redacted for certain reasons, but if I met in person with him, he could tell me what they were. The sentences were very suspicious and very inappropriate. I was trying to insert the most innocent-sounding words I could. For example, one of his sentences said something along the lines of, "He was always so blank and blank when she walked into the room." And I guessed maybe, I don't know, happy? He went on to write sentences that said he was delighted to see her because she was so blank and blank. And I was like, studious? Cheerful? What is he trying to say? But I didn't think that it was enough evidence to show that he was doing something malicious. So I decided to play along with it and just assume he was, he had innocent intentions. But then they just started getting more and more strange. He would start setting deadlines for sending in the answers. He started saying, "Oh yeah, that's a good way of saying it," or "Very good guesses. Your points are accumulating wildly. You'll get a prize in the end." And one night, I remember he had indicated in one of his puzzles that he wanted to meet up. And I guessed, I don't know, maybe for tea, chocolate, since that's what he would give me during office hours, but he indicated he wanted to meet off campus. And I was very confused as to why. He later sent me a message saying that he wondered if she had a sufficient supply of blank and blank. And he sent me this message at around 10:30 p.m. It was late at night, and I just started freaking out. I couldn't figure out any possible way that this could be interpreted as innocent. So I immediately started reading Ethan Frome to figure out what it was about. I read it several times that night, all in one go. and I realized it was a book about a young college-age student who was having an affair with an older man. I couldn't sleep that night. The next day, I spoke with my therapist, told him what was going on, asked if this was what I thought it was, and he told me, "You are definitely being groomed. I think that it would be wise to tell the administration immediately." So I met with a professor I knew and trusted very much, Father Raphael. He contacted the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and they all said that I should report what had happened to the Assistant Dean of Students, Amanda. I did, but nothing was done. I met with them over a video call, and they told me, of course, definitely, this should not have happened to you, and we will get on this right away. But they started blaming me. She said things like, and what did your therapist say when you told him that? He must have been like, "Hey, Rosie, this is obvious. Why didn't you see this sooner?" But then they would conflict what they had said with things like, "Well, how do you know that actually happened?" And I didn't know what to do or what to think. They sent me an email saying, "Yes, we're on your case. We take these concerns very seriously." But when I followed up, because they hadn't gotten back to me afterwards, they said, "Well, we can't give you any information on the status of your case unless we decide to file a Title IX. And until we decide to file a Title IX, if we do, we can't tell you anything." So I figured, okay, well, I guess they decided it wasn't worth a Title IX case after all. So I let it be for a while and assumed that they would take the necessary disciplinary actions. In the meantime, I was fearing for my safety, so I cut off all contact with him. And the more time went on, the more I realized what he had done. Every single book he had lent me had some sort of affair involved. And I realized how strange that was, and I wondered why the university hadn't taken action. Finally, I followed up several months later, and I asked what was going on. The dean told me that, the case must have gotten lost in the cracks. They had a change of administration in HR, so they must have just lost some paperwork or something like that. He would get on it immediately and find out what happened. HR gets back to me, and I'm told that, things got lost through the cracks, but they were on it, and they would let me know if they started a Title IX. But until then, I couldn't receive any updates. Fall comes around, and I start seeing Dr. Barloon at places on campus where he shouldn't have been and where he normally wouldn't be seen by other students. He started hanging around in student lounges, and one of my professors noticed that he was watching me and waiting for me by doorways and following me to class. So she met with me one day and asked me if I was okay. She said she had noticed that he was behaving very suspiciously, and she was very concerned for my safety because it looked like he was targeting me. I told her I was scared and I didn't know what to do because I had already contacted the administration several times and they weren't doing anything. So in the spring of this year, it started getting even worse. Every day I would see him wait outside the door waiting for me. It was at exactly the same time, which was when I was heading to class. And my route to class was within clear sight of his office. He had started following me around campus, when I would study in the library, I would see him watching me through the window. My professor said that she also saw him watching me. And another person who was not attending the university but had visited one day told me she had seen him hanging around these student areas and had described the same concern to me and asked me if everything was okay. Everything was not okay, but I didn't know what to do since I had already reported it, so I decided to go to the administration again. I filed a new Title IX case. I spoke with everyone I could think of. I spoke with the assistant dean, Angie. I spoke with the police. I spoke with the Title IX coordinator, who is also in charge of helping with student events. And I did everything I could to make sure that all the authority figures were contacted, including HPD. Nothing was done. The stalking continued. It continued to escalate, and I was fearing my safety more and more. Others, very close friends, for example, had also noticed, and they also feared for my safety, so I was forced to withdraw. Father Raphael had taken my claim seriously. My friends had taken my claim seriously. And a few professors had reported what was going on, including several of the psychology professors, but it seemed like their claims were being ignored too, and I couldn't figure out why. I was in a very vulnerable state. I had no idea what was going on. I was afraid that something like this would happen. It was actually one of my biggest fears, but people keep saying, well, that seems irrational. And so I believed that maybe it was. I hadn't received education on how to prevent this from happening. And the university was acting as if it wasn't happening. And they were trying to lead me to think that I was exaggerating. So I didn't know what to do. And I didn't know what to do. I was struggling with panic disorder, and I didn't know how to manage it. And what really helped me to manage it a lot of times was reading and writing and deepening my pursuit of an education even more.
It had gotten to the point where I absolutely thought the police needed to step in. I was deeply concerned for her safety. She was terrified. Her fiance was terrified. She was having to get friends and professors to walk her to and from locations because nobody had the basic common sense and decency to maybe step in and say that this wasn't acceptable on a university level.
I remember while Grady was being trafficked, she offered me a couch to crash on in her apartment, despite everything that she was going through. I took it because at that time I was being labor trafficked by another professor, and during that time I was afraid I was in danger of being taken advantage of or assaulted, and I didn't know where to go. So I asked if I could stay with her, and she let me for a few days until I thought that I was in a safer spot. The university never did anything like that for me. Why is it that my friend, who was being oppressed by the university, was offering me a haven and a shelter, and the university, which was supposed to be that shelter for me, proved to be a den? I remember When I went to counseling seeking help, I was told that I should stop freaking out as I was actively having a panic attack. The counselor told me, "Why are you anxious?" after I had already explained everything that had happened and that I had just witnessed my friend have a seizure. He asked me, "Don't you have any idea what your vocation is? How can you be anxious if you're praying?" Afterwards, when I was in a session with a female counselor at the university, he told me that I should go to counseling with him instead. And he told me that I should distance myself from my friends, that I should take fewer classes so I could pray more rosaries, even though I had explained to him that I was trying my best to pray every day. He told me it wasn't enough. After one session, in front of other people in the counseling lobby, he tried giving me advice, telling me I should set proper boundaries in front of other people outside of a counseling session. I remember I was in a very vulnerable position one spring. It was my second semester at the university. I was struggling to pay tuition. I had just had a very big health scare and had a very big operation that I had recovered from, which had exhausted all of my funds and all of my resources for school. So I had started looking around for jobs and alternatives to housing on campus that may be more affordable. And a professor on campus approached me and offered me a job as a nanny for his then 2-year-old daughter. I was looking for some sort of work that was along those lines because I had nannied for a while. I was very experienced, and I figured it was something I could do after classes, so I accepted. I was still enrolled at the university, still taking classes, and at first it seemed like a great offer. The professor's family treated me well. I was earning a little extra income. The pay seemed fair, and I thought, wow, this is a great arrangement. Maybe I can get through college after all. And I remember after I had worked for them for that spring semester, I had gotten in an internship in the medical center, but I didn't know how I was going to be able to live in Houston since my family lives far away. I didn't have any housing in Houston, so I didn't know what to do to be able to pursue my academic and professional dreams. I spoke to the family I was nannying for, mentioned the dilemma, and they offered me a place to stay over the summer, living in the professor's family's house, nannying for them, working for them. After the summer went by, I was still struggling to make ends meet, and I didn't know what to do about housing because that was taking up a very large amount of my funds, which I needed for food, for paying my deposits to be able to stay in the university, and for my medical expenses. So the family also offered me a place to stay over the semester. However, the situation quickly became very toxic. While originally I was being paid regularly, at least once a month, they began to pay me only every 3 months at most. And there were several moments when I was rushing from classes, I hadn't eaten dinner, and I was trying to grab a bite during work, and they told me I needed to wait. I was so hungry, I almost fainted several times. And since I was taking classes at the same university of the professor I was living with, I didn't know how to speak up and ask for help. There was a very large power dynamic, and I thought that if I had said anything, I might upset them, and it might affect my academics, or I might be reported for doing something. I didn't know what would happen. He convinced me to take on the ethical leadership minor, and during the spring, I had Dr. Ferlin as my professor, even though I was living with him, because he told me that in order to have the minor, I needed to take an independent studies course with him. Again, I was living with the same professor who was teaching me a course for a minor I had taken on so that I could get a scholarship, so that I could pay for my education, for food, and for housing. I was in a very vulnerable position because now not only did I have the pressure of having a professor at the university I was attending as my work supervisor, but he was also my professor, and I thought that if I tried to leave the job, which was quickly becoming more and more demanding after I became his student, or if I tried to say anything, then my academics would suffer, and in the long term, my career. So I didn't say anything. Some of my friends knew. But aside from them, I didn't know who I could safely tell. I thought, well, this situation must be normal. They must be trying to help. But I was asked to work more and more hours, and it got to the point where I was nearly collapsing from exhaustion because I was trying to juggle working on campus with working for my professor's family, with taking classes, with working in the medical center. I didn't know what to do. I felt stuck. There were several times when the family and my professor shouted at me, and I felt very scared. There were several times when I was left alone with him in the house, and with him and his child in the house, and I felt very vulnerable, but I didn't know how to say anything. There were several times when the mother of the family would leave with her daughter, the child I was babysitting, at a last minute's notice, sometimes only a night's notice, potentially leaving me alone in the house with a male professor, my male professor, for several days, and not providing me with other places I could stay. So I would go to friends' houses, like how I went to Grady's apartment for a couple nights because I didn't know where else to go. And I didn't understand why they didn't address the possibility that this would be a concern of mine when I did show that I was concerned. And I had told them that I needed to look for places to stay at, friends' houses, because I didn't want to be put in a vulnerable situation. So I didn't understand why this concern was not addressed. I wish I could say that these problems are fixable. I loved my university. I loved everyone in my university, and I never thought that this would happen. If I could do anything to fix these problems, I would, and I tried. I tried by asking the administration how I could help my friends, how I could help Grady, how I could properly report these professors who were harassing students. I did everything I could to be the best student I could be, and I did everything I could to try and help the university, from becoming president of Psych to helping students one-on-one, teaching them how to go to the administration to report their problems, reporting problems to the administration so that they would be in a position where they could do something. But nothing I tried seemed to work, and nothing I have tried seems to be working. So I don't know if at this point there is a way to fix the problems. I'm doing the last thing I know how to do right now, which is using my voice and begging the University of St. Thomas to, for once, listen to students, protect the vulnerable who are crying out to them.